Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I am your host, Rex Bear, and we have Matthew LaCroix with us. Now, Matthew's been on Decoders of Truth. He has a really cool YouTube page, Matthew LaCroix on YouTube. Now, his last name is spelled Lacroix, and he's also got a Facebook page, The Illusion of Us. He authored The Illusion of Us. I had the opportunity to interview him several months ago. Great podcast, wonderful reviews. And what we're going to discuss today is incredible. It is the battle of the eagle and the serpent. If you look throughout history, throughout items of antiquity, sacred works, and stuff that's available to the public, you're going to see symbology of the eagle and the serpent. And it seems like the serpent is oftentimes looked at as something dark or evil or Satan himself. And what we're going to get into is the possibility of there being different factions fighting amongst each other, trying to smear each other's name, and what the serpent really is, what the eagle really is, because Matthew takes this back thousands of years. We get into the Anunnaki timelines, and this is incredible, ladies and gentlemen. So put your seatbelts on. Matthew, thanks a lot for joining us here at the Leak Project. How the heck are you?
Hey, I'm great. I'm so glad to be back here. Thanks, Rex.
Absolutely. Now, one thing I like about what you did is you put together multiple slides, and it's seamlessly integrated to where we can walk the audience through these through this presentation with the slides and essentially show them what you're referring to give them a better idea. So let's get started. The battle of the eagle and the serpent.
Okay, great. So let's look into some of history and what we've seen with the battle and the eagle of the serpent. When we look at as far back as we can look at ancient advanced cultures in places like Egypt in Mesoamerica, we find these gods of antiquity that are worshipped by nearly every advanced culture of the past. And a lot of us think that they're merely myth, and they think of as some whimsical imagination to describe the times that were confusing based on lack of technology. But what we're looking at is the idea that it all connects back to the same place, to this forgotten war between these factions over the right to free will between mankind. And so we're going to look at evidence to really see if there really is this hidden battle between the eagle and the serpent.
Yeah, that's great.
So,
now, let me ask you before we get started, because
sure.
the serpent has been talked about for thousands of years, and it is considered by many cultures to be knowledge and nothing evil at all. And with the research that you have done, have you compiled that same synopsis?
That's exactly what we're going to kind of come to as a conclusion here. Really what we see is an inversion of everything, especially the things that really matter, the things that are important. And when we start to look at what really is the case based on evidence and hard truths, looking at cuneiform tablets and a lot of these ancient writings that have been left from pre-religion, we can find that the serpent is nothing like we think it is. The serpent and the dragon have been extremely misrepresented, and there's a reason behind that. And so the very reason behind how that's been misrepresented is because of one of these two brothers. So for over 100,000 years here on the earth, there's existed this ancient battle between the gods of history over mankind. And this battle has been waged between these two Sumerian gods. On the left, known as Enki, known by the Greeks as Poseidon, and this is his statue. One of his statues is Poseidon, you can see. And he is symbolized as the serpent. So any serpent knowledge and dragon knowledge is represented by his family side. And on the right, this is the famous Enlil, known to the Greeks as Zeus. And of course, everybody knows who that is. And he is represented by the eagle. And Enlil was known by the Sumerians as the Lord of the Air. And the mighty eagle was a fitting symbology for him, being that he was kind of the war god. His title was not the war god, but his actions certainly showed that. And then, of course, Enki was kind of the opposite. He was the lord of the earth and the oceans. And as you'll see, kind of their mentality follows this dualistic side of, one being completely the opposite of the other. And that's really what has ruled this story all along. The information we're about to go over has been heavily suppressed. And when you see where it leads, you'll know why. because once you know the truth of the eagle and the serpent, everything in your reality can change based on that information. The truth is true. It really is profound, and it connects back to not only our Anunnaki parents, but the reason why they've been fighting for so long. So we think for a moment about the serpent, this scary idea of the serpent, and we look at all the different times throughout history when it's been thrown under the bus and inverted to this idea of being a dark, evil thing. And we look and we wonder why. And we see that there has been this purposeful reason that the eagle in the church for thousands of years has been hunting and destroying the knowledge that connects back to the serpent. So if you want to look at the truth behind philosophy and all the most pure sacred knowledge that can come back to kind of who we really are and understanding the world around us, it always ties back to the serpent. And once you see the evidence that we're going to show on all the flags and crests, see, that's where the true knowledge of knowing which country was ruled by which governing brother is found by looking at the flags and the family crests that go way back to the earliest history. So let's take a look at some of these. You can follow the rise and fall of civilizations based on whether their flag or their origins were based on this eagle or serpent. And most of them are, of course, have an eagle on them because the warring powers of the world have seamlessly won for the last couple thousand years. And so this secret war can be seen on flags and crests in nearly every single country in major advanced warring culture in the past. And the eagle always adopted the crest that later would become that warring superpower. So let's look at some of the empires of the past to see if we can kind of track down this eagle. And we find, of course, the most famous of all would be the Romans, and then of course the Nazis. And both of these empires largely were focused on war as their means of their focus for this culture. Some cultures are focused on acquiring knowledge and research and developing great libraries. Like Alexander the Great was founded, the Library of Alexandria. But then you have other civilizations, controlled by the eagle, where their focus is about dominating other cultures and acquiring all of their resources. And so if we look back to what was on each crest, we can figure out what the motives and what the control was behind that. So, and a lot of people listening to this are probably living in the United States, and it's by no means a coincidence then you can see that the U.S. has been at war for the past something like 225 years or something in there, and we've had the eagle represented as almost an entire time. So we have to, not hold back our feelings about nationality and about feeling towards certain places, and just realize that we're just people playing our part in each one of these different landmasses, and it isn't about what country we're living in that we want to fight against the other one about. It's just learning the truth about what has happened in our history, and that's what we're going to do right now. So if we look at things like the conquest of the Americas and famous figures we learn in history like Columbus and Cortez and Pizarro, we see them as being the heroes of the story. But then if you look at evidence and what it shows, in the Anunnaki series we've done with Gerald Clark, we show that battle in Mesoamerica, the conquistadors coming over and basically destroying what we'll see is this serpent knowledge. And this is showing one of the past crests of the Spanish Empire. And that, of course, follows these conquistadors conquering all of these different lands of the serpent. So when we look, especially in places like Europe, Turkey, and Russia, we find this eagle back to the earliest cultures we can find of these advanced warring cultures. This is the Byzantine eagle found in Turkey, and of course, probably the most famous because of some of the other portrayals in like the Illuminati and other things. But this is in the Rothschild family crests and various things. But this is the Russian Federation crest, and this is the Byzantine eagle is present here, and you can see. My favorite image in the center, if you focus on the center, you see a knight there, and he's slaying a serpent dragon right in the center. And that's just such a fitting symbology for the eagle and all the conquering that it's done all over the world. And so
let me jump in.
Go ahead.
Because I think of the role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons,
Yep,
Lord of the Rings, and it's always the dragon that's the evil one that has all
that's
the
right.
gold, all the power. And you wonder sometimes, with the possibility when there was an article that came out several years ago that I remember reading on Yahoo News about how there's been several species of humans, everything from dwarfs to blue people. And then you think, well, could there have been elves? Could there have been dragons? What about dinosaurs? Could dinosaurs be dragons? Could they be one and the same? Could they be an offshoot of dinosaurs? I mean, that would make logical sense if you really think about it. And then if you look at countries like China, I know China really boasts the dragon, so maybe they haven't been overcome by the Enlil eagle yet,
That's
or have
right.
they?
You actually touched on something very important there right at the end. If you find civilizations that still have strong connections back to either the dragon or the serpent, then they are often the ones that were not able to be corrupted by the eagle. And as you said, Japan and China, you see some of the more mature civilizations where they practice very deeply with martial arts and spirituality, and you can kind of see that, and you can see that strong correlation, and and that's what we're actually going to dig right into that. So let's look at this for a minute. You can kind of look around the world and follow this by following the flags and crests of the various countries all throughout the world. You can see that the past is ultimately the ultimate history lesson, really, in finding out the truth. It's the telltale mark that gets left behind to the real story of which gods either created civilizations and turned them into a prospered state, or turned them into a warring civilization and often corrupted them, and then many of them collapsed later on. That's the very reason why we've seen so much of our history of war and tyranny here from so many kings and past empires. And the eagle has been used kind of to do the evil bidding for mankind, and this false perception that has been given that these ways are simply our leftover barbaric evolutionary traits. I want to say that if you look at ancient writings, even in many places in the Bible, it says that kingship was lowered from heaven, and you can read that in many places, and see that this hierarchy warring dominationship, this is from the Enlil eagle side. This has not come from simply some barbaric leftover trait that we have. And so the reason that's important is that a lot of people will use that to blame us for our actions, saying that we're the very reason for all of this simply because we were evolving. But really, you can see that that's not the case at all. And really, it's been the opposite. We've been held back and forced into this warring culture so that so many generations would go by until it became considered normal. And then that's why everyone thought that war was a means of just being like an everyday thing, when in reality it's not. It couldn't be further from the truth. So the eagle symbology is not only referencing Enlil, but it's his entire faction of his family. So Enlil has several sons, had many sons. Two of them in particular, one was named Ninurta, and the other one is Iskar-Adad, the war god and storm god. And they became a powerful imponent sons of Enki and his son Thoth and Marduk. So right there you have Poseidon and Zeus, and then they each have children who are fighting against each other in factions. And one civilization is created, taught through the serpent knowledge, and the other one is then attacked by the warring gods and then corrupted by blood sacrifice and those means. And you can follow that all throughout history. And so this battle between the families simply utilizing mankind's um, early primitive ways, it was just fighting between this battle and serpent knowledge, because Enki and his family always aspired to creating civilizations that were based on the teachings of the creator of all, and about expanding consciousness and becoming who you really were, and about utilizing the earth around you in the universe. It was about kind of a collective consciousness, a global consciousness, and a universal consciousness. And Enlil's side has always been about the war dominating culture of just taking resources and kind of being a powerful military might. And so if you can follow that with all of these civilizations throughout history, and we can go through some of those right now. So Ninurta, one of Enlil's sons, he really, to me, is one of the great, he's the great puppet master underneath his father behind the Roman Empire in a lot of these conquering war empires. The Byzantine eagle, known as the double-headed eagle, is his symbol. So anytime you see a double-headed eagle, it's run by one of Zeus's sons, known as Nernerta, who's the god of war. And so this is also called the Byzantine eagle, which came out of Turkey. And that's kind of where this story kind of begins. And so if we look at where the beginnings of where the eagle was able to conquer and take over, it kind of began with the Romans. In 313 AD, the Roman Empire Constantine I decreed that Christianity became the official religion of the people in the empire. And this may seem really a peculiar move to most who follow history, since the Roman Empire has persecuted the following of Christianity for years, with, of course, the crucifying of Jesus being the most famous example of all. So it may seem strange all of a sudden that they turn around and they start embracing Christianity. Thousands have been killed and persecuted by the Roman Empire. So why all of a sudden would the Romans change their stance? How many countless Christians and those following the early serpent knowledge did they crucify and kill, only to then embrace it later? This was the critical moment that represents the point when the ancient Gnostic serpent teachings of the past were taken by the mighty eagle and edited, rewritten, and turned into the ultimate form of control by stripping its purpose down to worship false gods, which demanded war and sacrifice. So if you go read the modern Bible, you'll see that there are places in there where you can, if your wife is not faithful or whatever, it's okay for her to be stoned to death, or all these really just horrible things in there. And those are all the remnants of the fact that what was originally pure knowledge and wisdom was rewritten for control. And we can go further into that. In 330 AD, as the Roman Empire lay in pieces on the brink of collapse, Emperor Constantine I decided to move all of his forces and power to a new capital called Constantinople, which in northern Turkey, which eventually became Istanbul, in honor of his supposed greatness. So he just named the entire city after himself. So there, the Roman Empire reorganized under the previous failing model, and they decided, instead of just conquering others in terms of kind of a blind race, they were going to kind of change their tactic, and they targeted religion as a kind of a psychological control. And they realized that religion was the ultimate way you could make people fight for you, by making you believe that something was willed by the gods, or willed by God in their case. So we look at the Byzantine eagle then spread its way across the world and infiltrated religion, and they were able to rewrite a lot of these teachings. And you can still find this double-headed Byzantine eagle in a lot of these Catholic churches still. This is one in Spain, and you can still find that today. It's a remnant of the past. So with vast armies now at their disposal, because as you can remember, the Roman Empire collapsed, but because they reorganized it in Turkey, it was able to kind of take on the Christian Empire in the Holy Lands. And that's kind of how the Roman Empire was able to survive in a different form. And it became essentially the Christian Empire. So basically, with their vast armies, they were able to control this ancient Gnostic and pagan wisdom by conquering the lands and destroying anything they found that wasn't following this decree of that was decided by these kings of Christianity. So we're going to find out what knowledge really was lost about the serpent, and it has nearly been lost, and what we can find by looking at the true evidence that's left now. And the place to find that knowledge, to see where it originally came from, is a very unexpected place. And most people would laugh at you, and a lot of people would laugh if they heard the idea of a place like Atlantis. Yet Atlantis is spoken about in so many different, past writings, and there's concrete evidence that it truly existed. So west of Morocco in the Canary Islands, according to all of the legends and the writings that we've been handed down, existed once a subcontinent that was named after, of course, our Atlantic Ocean, called Atlantis. And it was a large island subcontinent landmass. And we find that information on who told us, where it came from, and the most valuable record comes from Plato of all people. And if we look at Plato and the works that he's done and the influence that it's had throughout society, we can, it's kind of peculiar, I think, and amazing that when he talks about Atlantis in his writings in places like the Timaeus and Critias, people decided to ignore that. But where all of his other writings that talk about philosophy, that those are okay. And so there's selective knowledge that's been chosen here. But Plato himself talked extensively about Atlantis, and he said it existed 9,000 years before him, or somewhere around 12,000 years ago. And so in some of Plato's writings, in the Timaeus and Critias, he mentions that Plato can be found west of the Pillars of Hercules, which if you look into what the Pillars of Hercules are, you can see that there's strong evidence that says that it's the Straits of Gibraltar. And then it begins to make sense with all these maps. It really begins to connect when you look at these maps and you see, okay, it lines up exactly with what Plato and a lot of these other people said. Well, what was in Atlantis that was so important? You know, we got to start wondering what made Atlantis so important. Everyone talks about the legends of Atlantis and all the things it left behind. Was it simply just a utopian city that had a beautiful, pure place? That's not what really mattered the most. And you're going to see that the serpent knowledge that extended all throughout the world, that became the pagan and Gnostic knowledge, it simply was the serpent knowledge from Atlantis. So let's look a little bit more into Atlantis. What made Atlantis so important was this ancient serpent knowledge that they contained there. And this knowledge had been targeted by the eagle, led by powerful armies of the Romans much later on. And the reason for that was the truth behind the fact that Poseidon was the great creator of Atlantis. He's the great founder of Atlantis. And that's why the serpent knowledge goes all the way back to him and his son Thoth. Because when Atlantis was destroyed, that serpent knowledge had to be protected. So we have to look into retracing the steps of the serpent and those who have protected its knowledge. And we find if we look back at this legacy of the serpent, we find that it always goes back to Enki and his son named Ningshita. And now Ningshita is someone that I want you to remember because he had many important incarnations here, using these human avatar hosts, such as Thoth in Egypt, Enoch to the Gnostics, Hermes to the Greeks, and especially, and most importantly, Jesus, which we talked about just a second ago, was of course crucified with the Romans. So once you think back on that, look at the sheer brutality they had against the Christians, with, of course, was kind of being led by Jesus and his teachings. And that tells you why they were trying to stomp them out and destroy them before they could ever get out and pass there. And they were stopped essentially at that point and lost for so long until they've kind of just now started to come back. So much has been lost from our earlier time period. And there's only these small fragments that still remain. Much of the serpent knowledge, like Rex mentioned earlier, there's still some dragon and serpent knowledge that's extensive throughout Asia, in places like China and Japan. But the most extensive evidence we still have for stone monuments and writings comes from Mesoamerica. That's where we can really see that the serpent knowledge reigned for years and years and years until it was finally destroyed. So the reason behind these teachings of Atlantis and the serpent knowledge of Mesoamerica was that when Atlantis was destroyed, that serpent knowledge needed to go somewhere. And largely that's how the civilizations of Thoth were then created in Mesoamerica, to kind of honor and then carry on what was lost from Atlantis. So let's go a little bit deeper in here.
I really like that guy's hat.
Oh yeah, that's so this might be really kind of familiar to a lot of people. You know, a lot of people may be familiar if you live in the United States or a lot of other parts of the world, down through Mexico and South America, of having a plumed serpent or like a plumed headdress or just any kind of a feathered headdress on their head. And the most important thing that I need to recognize here is that this is an example of information and knowledge that's been misrepresented, because throughout all of my time until just within learning about this, thought that the feathers on Native Americans shared all throughout the United States down through Mexico and down through Central America and South America was based on the eagle and the bird. But what it actually represented was the plumed serpent. And that's why a second ago I showed this. These statues all throughout Mesoamerica simply represented the plumed serpent. And if you think about what a plumed serpent is, it's simply just a dragon. And so that's how they use all of these things, these symbols as metaphors, and we just simply don't get it. We think, oh, there's nothing like that looks like that. It's crazy. Whereas these cultures were thinking way ahead of us, and they're trying to show metaphors to explain what they were trying to say. So these teachings and grand civilizations that were created by Thoth in order to resurrect what had been lost from Atlantis, they were only later corrupted by the eagle through war and blood sacrifice. We have to strongly consider all throughout history these native civilizations of the Americas, which became the stronghold of the plumed serpent. And then remember, the conquistadors of the mighty Spanish Empire that then conquered simultaneously the north to the south of all of these cultures. And I want you to remember that. Because the real meaning behind these native headdresses, as I talked about, it always extends back to the plumed serpent and the winged dragon. It has nothing to do with the eagle. That was simply what was stolen from them. And the flag of Mexico, to me, is one of the best examples still shown in the world. Because if you look at the history of Mexico and how those civilizations by Thoth were created in Tenochtitlan and Teotihuacan, you then see that when Cortez landed and then they conquered them, the eagle was able to conquer the serpent. And that's how their flag was able to eventually mean that. And unfortunately, most Mexicans don't know that. If they did, they probably wouldn't be as happy celebrating it. Huh. So the truth can really be found by looking at some of these ancient flags. In my book, The Illusion of Us, I talk about how a great veil has been placed over much of society, creating a false narrative of our history by controlling the information of the past and our purpose. That's how I was saying all of these symbols have been inverted and been made to believe the opposite of what they really are. Because if we knew the truth of what these symbols and teachings and all of these things meant, we would find out the real truth of everything. That's what they're trying to hide. Because it really does create what we think of as the Matrix. By holding back the truths of history, they're able to control what we think of the events of the past, and kind of allow kind of this trained subconscious to attack anything that doesn't fit this predetermined model of what they give everybody through, this collective curriculum that's given through school. So what would happen if society learned that the great gods of the eagle were simply using civilizations as a means to settle ancient family disputes, with the ultimate cost of being the blood of hundreds of millions of human beings throughout history? And I mean, right here, the image of the Romans. Just think of the image of the Romans and how many countless civilizations they conquered and destroyed, being run by the eagle right above it. We have to strongly consider why the dragon and serpent has been made to be perceived as evil all throughout history, whereas the eagle was a sign of freedom to us. Remember that. The hard truth that we're going to understand is that nearly all of these things have been inverted to the opposite. And then if you think that way, you kind of figure it out if you objectively look at it. One of the greatest pieces I have for understanding this was in mainly P. Hall's Secret Teaching of All Ages. In the story of Poimandres, you learn that the dragon actually represents the great mind and consciousness of the universe. So back to the creator of all, hence the polluted term of God, the real God, being mankind's immortal teacher and guide. So that's when you start to put that together, you see why the serpent and the plumed serpent, the serpent and the plumed leading to the dragon has been demonized and inverted, because it ultimately connects back to what the real God is, and not how Enlil and his forces have pretended that they were God all along. These great beings of Yahweh and Jehovah in the Bible are, of course, not actually God, but Enlil and his family mimicking that they are God to control and enslave humanity. Many important teachings have been inverted, like the number 13 being entrenched us. And by the way, tomorrow is Friday, number 13th. And so remember that tomorrow, number 13th has been entrenched in us to be unlucky. And everyone thinks that way. So whenever it comes around, people don't want to talk about it, or they stay home because something might happen to them. And the amazing thing you'll learn is if you read through the Mayan codexes and you read through the Emerald tablets, you'll find out that the number 13, if you add up all the different dimensions of what they consider, actually represented the domain of the creator of all. So it was the creator of all's number for 13. And that's simply how, another one of these examples of how things have been inverted to what they really are. And my favorite example that's been inverted would be the great Sumerian god known as Isis, who is known as Ninhursag or Ninmah. And if you look through history and you look through the evidence, you'll read that she was the fertility goddess of mankind, kind of the mother of mankind. And you get the word mother from her name. So we got the name mother from her. So here you have what we should be considering the ultimate female that we should be worshiping, our great mother. And instead, it's been completely inverted to mean this orchestrated terrorist group that runs around Syria that's been propped up to kind of both instill fear and also destroy the remnants of the past. Known as ISIS, and I don't like to use that name for them, but these hired mercenaries of the Eagle are starting to be exposed now and taken down. But they've run through Syria, and we have lost so many ancient Sumerian tablets and writings that they've destroyed. And just like these ancient armies of the past, with the burning of the Library of Alexandria and all these other places that were destroyed, it's simply just a means to destroy the serpent knowledge. Nothing has changed from that.
That reminds me of why the native cultures have probably been systematically destroyed, because of their ancient knowledge.
It's the serpent knowledge, exactly.
Huh.
If you can look at those cultures all across the Americas. One of the things we looked at in the Anunnaki series was that, being the god name of Quetzalcoatl and Kukulkan and Amaru, they're all the same god. They're all just Thoth. So if you think about that and you say, okay, they're all created with the same Atlantean knowledge, that's why they were all systematically run through and destroyed after by the Eagle. So if we look at this correlation for thousands of years, we see the Eagle running our civilizations and cultures and societies. Of course, and that's run under Enlil's side of the family, and they've been battling based on their ancient disagreements that they've always had between each other. The idea that they don't like how mankind is run, and so they fight to have it run a certain way. And the Eagle is during this time of Pisces, during this zodiacal period, has of course been able to run and control the entire our civilizations for so long, and that's why they've been the way they have.
Do you think things are changing now?
Yeah, well, as we enter the time of Aquarius, that's why they've been repeatedly trying to start World War III, but they've been not able to, and that's because they're not the Eagle is no longer in control anymore. Now, here's my favorite representation, Rex. It goes way back to the Garden of Eden, where the famous story everyone knows, that we're told that the serpent tempts Adam and Eve with knowledge of good and evil, or the freeing of their consciousness, and that this great gift is imparted by the serpent. And yet in the modern Bible and religion, it's taught that the serpent is the devil and that it's tempted with evil things and it's portrayed as evil. But just like all those other things, go ahead.
Let me jump in, because I've actually read through the Nag Hammadi treaties. I brought this up before, but in the secret book of John, which is a lot less tainted than the majority of the biblical records people have access to, it's just as old. It has a completely different spin on the serpent. The serpent actually tries to help Eve. The serpent is trying to protect Eve from the archons, and it's just incredible.
Isn't that amazing? And you just mentioned You were talking about the Nagamani Library and the Book of Enoch, and these are writings that I'm about to go over in a minute here. But those are the pure serpent teachings that were being targeted. That was the whole point of them trying to rid those, that so that they wouldn't be around anymore to ever come up, so that no one could ever find the truth of any of this. When Atlantis was destroyed from cataclysms and deluges, I mentioned that this knowledge traveled to all the places across the world that had this knowledge back to the stars and the serpent. And of course, the most famous is in Egypt with the Great Pyramids. But it's all throughout the world where it spread across. And so we just look at places like Mesoamerica, and we find the strongest evidence back to the serpent. This is in Chichen Itza, and you can see this was the god Kukulkan, who I mentioned was the same god back to the Mayas. But you can also trace this back to the Hopi and Puebla of the United States, and then all the way down to the Inca, which had the god Amaru in South America. I mentioned this before, but I want to bring it up again because it's important. The Aztec god was known as Quetzalcoatl, and the Mayan god was known as Kukulkan. But if you look at the evidence for both of those, is that you can see strong correlations that they were the same being. They were simply Thoth in different incarnations. And if you see that, and then you follow this serpent, this is an Aztec representation right here, and what I just showed a second ago, this is a Mayan representation. You can see it's the same serpent all the entire time being represented, and that's how you follow it all throughout history. And all these incarnations of Thoth were because he took on. You can read about how in the Emerald Tablets, he decided instead of having an eternal life of the gods in heaven, he would stay behind and be mankind's eternal teacher until the days of darkness of Pisces had passed. And that's why the Hermetic writings and all of these teachings of the serpent have been trying to be protected in so many of these cultures. You can destroy the people, you can kill the people, and you can rid them of their cultures and their past ways, but you cannot destroy these giant pyramids and in all of these places that are remnant. There's just too much of it, and that's how those things were able to survive to the light of a new day. And then we're really lucky that they were able to still be around to have those teachings. And of course, through the power of the eagle, the mighty Spanish conquistadors conquered all of the Americas, which was the heart of this Atlantean serpent wisdom. And I want to point out that if you think that these are heroes, consider the fact that with Cortez and Pizarro, Cortez of course conquered Mexico, and Pizarro conquered South America, the Inca in Peru. Montezuma, who was the ruler of the Aztec, was captured by Cortez and held for ransom, and Atahualpa was the head ruler of the Inca, was captured by Pizarro and held for ransom. And when they both got their ransoms, both of those leaders were executed, and then all the civilizations were then stampeded and then destroyed. And then all we have left are these remnants that we're trying to uncover right now today. The cleansing of the pagans and Gnostics by the eagle through the corrupted church was to destroy this legacy, and we can still see places left behind of this Gnostic pagan wisdom in places like Stonehenge, where they connect back to this lost connection to the stars and the universe that we once had. And so if go think of the word pagan, meaning any of these religions, any of these people who followed anything other than the predetermined Christianity and Catholic Church before these times, that's why the very idea of the pagans being targeted was such by all these different cultures, because they were the ones still protecting this knowledge. And my favorite example for this, and it's a really striking example, and I really encourage people to look into this themselves to see the truth. But the holiday that everyone celebrates vigorously, it's one of everyone's favorites, is St. Patrick's Day. And I want to give you a little information about St. Patrick's Day that's going to maybe blow your mind a little bit. In the early 17th century, St. Patrick, remember, everything has been inverted by the eagle. Many of these saints are actually just soldiers of the church. So if you think about it that way, St. Patrick kicked all the snakes out of Ireland, right? So that's what the story of St. Patrick's Day. People don't know that, or they just see a leprechaun and drinking, and so they all get drunk, and that's how they portray the holiday. But the real truth behind it is that if you look at the geography of Ireland and you know anything about its relative latitude, you know that there are no snakes in Ireland, and there never have been. So if there are no snakes, and you look at the metaphor for what that really means, a lot of these things are simply metaphors that we have to understand. It just means pagans. So they were ridding the snakes, the snakes out of Ireland, the pagans out of Ireland. You see that there is the evidence right there to the fact that the pagans have been the ones protecting the serpent snake knowledge. And then you can connect that all the way back to the very beginnings of Atlantis. And you can connect to all these civilizations that have been trying to protect it all along. And this represents simply one of the last remaining places up in Scotland and Ireland that had these people that were protected. And they were, of course, celebrating their their domination and being kicked out of the country. If you look at the complexity and the sheer scale behind this, you gotta look at how the eagle has been able to control so many human civilizations. It should be pretty clear that the gods were simply just these Anunnaki higher beings who have been playing the great puppet masters of our history. At some point, we got to decide if we want to actually take the reins of our own story and stop letting them dictate it for us. How many human lives need to be sacrificed by these war criminals of our evolution? To me, the value of a human life is the ultimate gift we have. Our consciousness provides us with every single possible means for us to reach the true light beings that we really are. And the value of a human life is what is at stake here. This serpent dragon knowledge, all it does is connect back to who we really are, connecting back to our chakra centers, and that identity is what's being fought over. Because if people don't know who they really are, they'll allow themselves to be ruled and governed, and they'll fight for another country and die for them. Once you learn the truth of it, everything really does change, because then you no longer are governed by those things any longer. Please find more about this in my book of The Illusion of Us, and I have a YouTube page. Rex mentioned. Thank you so much, Rex. I make a lot of videos like this. I continuously try to do a lot of different content to try to connect different parts, from both connecting back to thinking like spending time in the outdoors and Gaia, to everything to the Anunnaki and higher consciousness and dimensions. And I want to also say I've learned so much, and a huge shout out to Gerald Clark, who's been a really huge inspiration and teacher for me behind this. And his website can be found at geraldclark77.com. So please look at a lot of these videos and some of these books that we've written, because we really have tried to expose this battle of the eagle and the serpent that's been held back for so long. Because this time of Aquarius that Thoth talks about how eventually mankind will be able to find this knowledge again. And that's the time we're in right now with Aquarius. That's been predicted by the Mayans and all of these cultures. And so this is the time when this information is flooding the internet and being released. And so it's just those who can look into themselves and have the courage to find the truth. So thank you very much.
Right on. You certainly made my job easy today, Matthew. And I just want to say I'm thinking of the hysteria behind 2012. The December 21st, 2012, or maybe it's December 23rd, but
yes,
I remember the hysteria behind that, and that could have actually been the death of an old age and the beginning of the Aquarius age. So in reality, it might be scary to some, but for those that want the truth, those that are seeking wisdom, knowledge, have an open mind, yet not so open that their brain's going to fall out on the sidewalk and get splattered all over the place, then I think that now could be a very golden time for a whole bunch of people. So this is great, Matthew. Really appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, get The Illusion of Us. It's a great book. I've read it. I really like it. And also go to youtube.com/clandestine time lord. Become a member at leakproject.com. Question everything and be the change you want to see.